A duck walked into a large discount store, went up and down the aisles filling a shopping cart with goods, and then pushed the cart up to the checkout area. The clerk took a look at the full shopping cart, and he was a little surprised by the large amount of stuff the duck had gathered. "Will that be cash or charge?" the clerk politely asked. The duck looked at him a little impatiently and said, "Hey, I'm in kind of a hurry. Just put it all on my bill." Are you still listening? That was a joke. This is a session about humor and its role in character and leadership, so I thought it would be a good idea to start off with a joke. In fact, it's almost always a good idea to let people know you have a good sense of humor, because in this society, we take humor very seriously. And by the way, you do have a good sense of humor, don't you? I'm confident you'll answer in the affirmative, because virtually everyone is sure they have a good sense of humor, and we'll be talking more about that later. Right now, I just want to emphasize how important humor is as an aspect of strong character. Yet, if you were to ask 100 people to name character's most vital elements, I doubt if more than 5 would refer to humor. In fact, I don't think any would. When he wrote his classic study of American society in the early 18th century, the Frenchman, Alexis de Tocqueville, predicted that if the United States ever came to be ruled by a dictator, it would be someone with a well-developed sense of humor. If this is true, it's certainly a very different situation than you would find in any other country in the world. Think of the communist and fascist dictators who have played such a major role in 20th century history. They were not exactly a bunch of laugh-a-minute guys. They were good at projecting anger, and they were good at creating fear, but humor? No. Americans, however, respond to very different qualities in their leaders. And though they were obviously not dictators or tyrants, it's true that most of our beloved national leaders have had the ability to make others laugh and to laugh at themselves. Though he was fundamentally a rather melancholy man, Abraham Lincoln was also renowned as a humorist. Every biography of Lincoln refers to his love of funny stories and his willingness to stop and tell a joke even in the midst of important business. And in more recent times, Presidents Franklin Roosevelt, John Kennedy, and Ronald Reagan were able to smooth out the ups and downs of their political careers with humor, and it was often directed at themselves. People could see that these men were strong enough and confident enough to make jokes at their own expense. And, as we'll discuss later, these men were also wise enough to apply humor carefully and at the right times. When we recognize those abilities in a person, we're able to believe they'll also be strong and confident in serious or even dangerous situations. In short, we as Americans see a well-developed sense of humor as an aspect of a strong character and as almost a prerequisite for leadership. But before you go out and buy a joke book as part of your personal self-development program, here's the bad news. To a great extent, you can't learn to be humorous, and that alone makes humor different from every other trait we've discussed in this program. There are many examples of people who learned to overcome fear or even downright cowardice, and who went on to become courageous leaders. There are fools who learned to be wise, and there are liars who turned into honest men and women. There are rigid thinkers who learned flexibility. But I personally have never encountered a humorless person who learned to be humorous. And if there were such a person, I'm sure I would have come across one by now, because I have certainly encountered a great many humorless people. Perhaps one reason we respond so strongly to humor in our leaders is because we associate it with honesty. And I think this association is well-founded. Real humor is honest because real humor can't be faked. You can pretend to be serious, just like you can pretend to be intelligent. You can always fake those qualities, and some people do it all the time, but you can't really pretend to be funny. There's something paradoxical in our attitude toward humor. We want to discover humor in other people, and we want to find it in ourselves, but we don't want too much of it. And in certain situations, we don't want any of it at all. Leaders intuitively understand the role of humor, and they apply it in the right amounts at the right times. They understand that, as with many of the other good things in life, too much of a good thing is almost as bad as none at all. Earlier I suggested that to a large extent humor is something that you either have or you don't, that unlike many other self-development skills, it's very difficult to improve your capacity for humor. But if that's true, doesn't it suggest that there's something self-contradictory about this whole discussion? After all, what's the point of talking so much about humor if there's really very little you can do towards strengthening your capacity for it? Well, it may be true that you can't increase the natural proportion of humor in your personality beyond a certain preordained point. But that's not the end of the story. You can still learn to have a basically humorous approach to life. Or perhaps playful would be a better word. And I think the ability to do so is an extremely important indicator of strong character. Modern physics has demonstrated that light can act as either a particle or a wave. If we design an experiment based on light behaving like a wave, we will find that it does indeed behave like a wave. If we design another experiment in which light is supposed to behave like a particle, it sure enough behaves like a particle. So what really is the true nature of light? There is no simple answer to that question. It's all a matter of perception and expectation. In the same way, life can be either a comedy or a tragedy, and it's always in your power to determine how you want to see it. I prefer to see it as a comedy, and I highly recommend this to you also, but let me explain exactly what I mean by that. I don't mean to suggest that life is a comedy like you see on television at 8 o'clock on Channel 5. I'm using comedy according to the classical definition of the term, as a progression from sadness to happiness, from a low point to a high point, from poverty to wealth in every sense. In literature, the best example of comedy in this sense is Dante's Divine Comedy. Although I don't believe there is a single joke in that entire work, it's a comedy in the sense that the story begins in hell and ends in paradise. Yet most people don't even know that Dante wrote 2 more volumes that take place after the completion of the Inferno. History has chosen to focus on the frightening, painful part of Dante's poem, and if you're not careful, you may find yourself doing the same thing in your own life. We live in a time that has equated seriousness with intelligence, unhappiness with sensitivity, and victimization with moral authority. In short, we have largely chosen to see life as tragic rather than comic. But to the extent you participate in this, I believe you are limiting your potential for success in the material sense, and, even more importantly, you are doing nothing for your character, or at least nothing good. Humor can be your best tool for distancing yourself from the negativity and pessimism that's so rampant today. It's not always an easy tool to use, but I believe its importance has been seriously underestimated as an element of strong character. George Bernard Shaw said that everything is funny as long as it happens to someone else. But a really strong person is able to laugh even when the joke's on him.